woman's turn came to go into King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for the women. Holy moly.
I thought she was already beautiful.
Yeah. 12 months of beauty treatments. 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics.
This is why the king was upset with himself, because he was going to have to wait 12 more months.
That's right. That's right. And this is how she would go to the king. Here's another key to this. It wasn't just about preparing herself with a beauty treatment. Here's the reality. This is a reality statement, folks. Not only was it a beauty contest, but it was preparing for sexual relations with the king. You could say he was going to do a test drive before he was going to accept her as queen. That's just the reality of it. If they weren't compatible, she wasn't going to be queen. Anything that she wanted was given to her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. So she could take whatever she wanted that she possessed at the harem to the king's palace with her. In the evening, she would go in there, and in the morning return to another part of the harem to care of Shaggai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summoned her by name. You got to understand, it was never, ever allowed to go before the king unless you were summoned. You didn't just arbitrarily go up and knock on the palace door and say, "Hey, I need to see the king." That just didn't happen. If the king did not summon you, you were not allowed in his presence. Period. When the turn came for Esther to go to the king, she asked for nothing other than what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the harem, suggested. And Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. She was taken to King Xerxes in the royal residence in the 10th month, the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than to any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his nobles and officials. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts with royal liberality. So Esther, this Jew, this Benjamite, who was raised by her uncle, goes before the king, and she is the top dog. Xerxes is very attracted to her and decides he will make her king. So can you see how God worked? God does this throughout the Bible. He put the most unlikely young woman to be queen of a Persian king. But he knew there was a purpose for that, because he knew what was going to happen next. But there was going to be a plot to kill the Jews, which we'll talk about later on. So God has a way of using situations and people to his end. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Okay, right there tells you that Mordecai had some role in the civil or judicial government there. Why is that? We talked about it last week. What's the significance of the king's gate?
That's where they did business and stuff.
That's where they did business.
Or
Yep. So he had some role. We don't know, it's not defined. We don't know what it is. But just the indication that he was at the king's gate tells us he had some role. And realizing that many of the exiles didn't go back. They preferred their life where they were, and that's where they stayed. But Esther had kept secret her family background and nationality, just as Mordecai had told her to do, for she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up. During the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers, who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. You would think they would be smart enough not to speak of that plot in front of Mordecai, because they would have known what was going to happen. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. This is going to be a very important fact later on in the story, because the king will be indebted to Mordecai because he foiled an assassination attempt on his life. And when the report was investigated and found to be true, the two officials were impaled on poles. And this was recorded in the book of Annals in the presence of the king. They had a deal about impaling people on poles. You know, just like the Romans used crosses, the Persians impale people on poles. And if you just picture that, what does that look like? There's going to be a pole, and you're going to come right down through it. You're going to impale you on it. Probably right through your middle section. Any questions at this point? So we've got Xerxes now has a new queen. It's Esther, a Jew, a Benjamite. Against everything Gentile. But she's the new queen of Persia. After these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, elevating him and giving him a seat of honor higher than that of all the other nobles. So now we have another character coming on the scene. Haman. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor. Why is that? Okay? Were the Amalekites and the Jews friends or foes? Okay? So he knew who he was. He knew who his descendants were. They were not friends. And Mordecai, being a Jew, he's only going to kneel down for probably two people I would about guarantee he's going to kneel down for King Xerxes. Maybe, I don't know. We don't see that laid out right here. And we don't see that he's a God-fearing Jew. I mean, we don't really know that. We know he's a Benjamite from the tribe of Benjamin. But we know he's not going to kneel down to Haman. It's not going to happen. And that ticks Haman off.
Yeah, it wasn't a worship thing like Daniel.
Right.
So, I'm like you, he would probably bow down to Esther and down to the king. Because it wasn't a worship deal. It was just an honor deal for position.
Yep. Then the royal officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's commands?" Day after day they spoke to him, but he refused to comply. Therefore they told Haman about it to see whether Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated, for he had told them he was a Jew. So it's finally come out that he's told them that he was a Jew. And this is going to affect Haman on how he treats Mordecai and what he's going to try to do. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. Yet having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all of Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. In the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month, the month of Nisan, and the Pur, was cast in the presence of Haman to select a day in a month. And the lot fell on the 12th month, the day of the fair. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, "There is a certain people dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all other people." So if we think back about the temple and the rebuilding of the temple, that was all under Darius. So we've got a new king here who really hasn't had a lot of interaction with these people, these returned exiles, directly. Now his son will, Artaxerxes, later on. Remember when we read back in Ezra early on where that letter was sent to Artaxerxes? That's Xerxes' son. He's going to be the one that's going to stop the rebuilding of the city itself. He's leading the walls. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, "There is a certain people dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all other people, and they do not obey the king's law. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal treasury." So he's trying to bribe the king with money. So the king took his signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. "Keep the money," the king said to Haman, "and do with the people as you please." Then on the 13th day of the first month, the royal secretaries were summoned. They wrote out in the script of each province and each language of each people all Haman's orders to the king's satraps, the governors, the nobles. These were written in the name of King Xerxes himself and sealed with his own ring. Dispatchers were sent by couriers to tell all the king's provinces with the order to destroy, kill, and annihilate all of the Jews, young and old, women and children, on a single day. The 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality, so that they would be ready for that day. The couriers went out, spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was bewildered. So Haman talked Xerxes into this edict to kill all the Jews everywhere in a single day. So it was all going to be coordinated in all the provinces, that all the Jews would be killed on the same day. And then they're sitting there drinking. And that's where we're going to stop. And the rest of the story is going to kind of show us how God intercedes again. And it's amazing how that works. And it's so evident in the stories of the Old Testament. It's so evident how he used Gentile kings to fulfill his purpose. He used Gentile nations to discipline his people. That's the way God works. He will use the most unlikely folks to get the result that he's looking for. Any thoughts?
I thought it was quite interesting that the enemy of the Jews gave an edict to destroy all the Jews in one day, and God gave an edict that Israel is going to be reborn in one day.
Yep. Yeah, for people that think that God doesn't have his hand in this stuff, they're just not paying attention. They don't understand who God is and how he works. Nothing happens that he does not control. Period. When we accept that, life is so much clearer and so much easier for us.
For Esther and kids, the historians say there were 100 girls that were brought to peace. So for her to be one,
Oh, yeah.
shows you.
Yep. So, yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing that this Jewish girl from the tribe of Benjamin and her uncle just happened to be working for the king's administration in some capacity. God works that way. All the dominoes fall the way he wants them to. Every time. Okay. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time we've had together. We thank you for your word. We thank you for your word, because the Old Testament gives us so many stories and understandings of who you are and how you control everything. Let us always understand that and be willing to just do what you would have us do. Follow your Son and let your Spirit guide us through this life. All these things I pray in Jesus'
You probably don't need to shut that off.